relaxed. I'm Terry Beanstalk. I'm going to moderate this panel. Have some of you been to my panels before? I've been doing this for a long time. Good. So what I try to do at these panels is have you ask the questions you want to hear. We have some of the leading experts in the world on OTT and new technology and media and what's happening. And this is a great opportunity for you to ask them questions of what you want to hear, not what I want to hear. I know a lot of this stuff already, and this is your opportunity. So feel free to interrupt. Feel free to raise your hand to get my attention. I'll try to watch out for hands, but the best panels are the ones where I do the least amount of work and ask the least amount of questions. And I'll start it off. We have one panelist. Is around somewhere. Still waiting for him. Hey, did you find him? Nope. Okay. So we'll start with Adam. If he comes, he comes. As I was saying, that my background is out of Comcast. I was Executive Vice President and General Counsel. I ran the video on demand platform, and a lot of the new media was heavily involved in the launch of a lot of their new products, like their online business and digital phone and DVRs and high def and so forth. One thing I learned at Comcast was where technology and our industry had always been evolutionary, it's now revolutionary. The changes are happening so fast, it's very hard for the marketplace to keep up with them, and certainly hard for the business people to keep up with the technology in the marketplace. And what you're going to hear about today are a lot of the things that are happening and how everyone's catching up and trying to keep ahead of the curve to see where the opportunities lie. 5 years ago, we barely talked about social media. We were all bent on video on demand and talking about TiVo and the technologies at the time, and now they seem like old news, although they still are in great use. A lot of things have overtaken, and one of the things that has overtaken it dramatically is over-the-top internet programming, internet-based programming. Would have everyone introduce themselves. I don't like to hear long explanations about their businesses and stuff, but I want them to talk about what they're doing and their companies so that you get a sense of where they're coming from. And so as we go into the questions, you'll understand their perspective. These folks have been in the industry a long time, and they've been at various companies, so they have a lot of different things to add to the mix. But as important as to who they are, it's always been important to me to find out who you are and find out where you are in the ecosystem, because we know how to tailor the panel to that. Who's in content production? Advertising? Distribution? Technology? Software? Measurement? Social? Mobile? Well, we have folks in everything, which is great. With that, I'm going to start with Alan. Alan, why don't you talk about yourself and what you do, and we'll go from there.
Sure. My name is Alan Canestraro. So I run a company called Rio, and we're a social media experience where we curate and personalize, produce short-form content from all kinds of sources. My background's in technology. I spent 12 years at Apple and a few years at Facebook developing new consumer experiences.
My name is Ryan Nugent. I work at a company called Gunpowder and Sky, where we produce, finance, distribute, do marketing for everything from 90 minutes to 90 seconds of content. So we're a studio, but we also do the marketing in-house for most of our projects, which I work on marketing insights and digital strategy for the company.
Jonathan?
Hi there, my name is Jonathan French. I work for a company called TV4 Entertainment. We're an OTT platform. We produce, curate, and distribute our own channels. We have 10 or 15 in market, and we're building 100. So.
Fabian.
I'm Fabian Bergfeld. I'm the CEO and founder of W12 Studios. We are a digital design agency based in London. We develop the user interface, you might want to call it, for a lot of the leading media and entertainment companies around the globe. So we work with broadcasters, we work with emerging players, we work with CE device manufacturers, we work with service providers to essentially develop next generation entertainment platforms and experiences.
JR.
I'm J.R. Griffin, the VP Digital Marketing and Digital Business Development at Fremantle Media North America. We're a division of Fremantle Media that produces over 10,000 hours of TV programming around the world every year. We make shows like competition shows and game shows like America's Got Talent, American Idol, Family Feud, The Price is Right, Let's Make a Deal. We also have our own game show network called Buzzer, and we're getting into scripted programming. American Gods was our show that was on Starz last year.
Bob.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Rodriguez, and I'm with a company out of Miami called Natcom Global. We're a former NBC company, and we specialize in short-form programming, so about a minute of it. We produce approximately 1,500 originals a month in multiple languages, and we distribute it to all the likely suspects like AOL and Amazon, but we also have our own proprietary distribution that we make available to publishers around the hemisphere, where we monetize the content and give them a big fat check at the end of the month.
Let's figure out where to start, because there's a lot to talk about. Let's talk about devices for a second. We were talking over lunch about how many devices everyone has in the home. I think, Bob, you were talking about you and your kids. I have the same thing. In my family, we used to talk about TV. Now we talk about every person in the house watching programming and content on a different device simultaneously, at all, 24/7, some internet-based, some cable-based, some satellite-based, some mobile-based. How is the proliferation of devices, tablets, smartphones, different types of TV and over-the-top TV programming, how's the proliferation of devices impacted the way consumers consume content?
Well, from what we see, I mean, we've seen much more compression in time, right? So our whole focus of short form, back when we acquired the company from NBC, the average short form in our world was approximately 2 minutes, and now Facebook published not long ago that their average is 45 seconds. So what we see in the world of short form with the appliances, Terry, specifically to your question, is you can segment based on all the demographics. So I do have 3 younger kids at home, and they all have their own appetite for what they want to watch. And we end up having 5 appliances where everybody's watching whatever they want to watch. Some of us are watching short-form programming. Some of us are watching long-form programming. But it's because of the differences in appliances and how people are comfortable in getting their content that the industry of content in general is growing.
JR, obviously you're in the content business. Are you agnostic about the devices that your content plays on, or do you favor some over others? What are the viewing habits showing you?
You have to learn. You just have to be there. Right? In my house, as a consumer, I'm watching my YouTube TV and Chromecasting it to my big TV in the living room. My 9-year-old is watching Musical.ly videos on her phone. Right, in the same room, she doesn't care about the TV. So you have to make sure things are where they are. We have America's Got Talent, one of the biggest shows of the summer on NBC. A young singer came on to audition in front of the judges for the season, and they said, what do you want to do? I want to be a singer. She's like, I love the show. I watch it on YouTube all the time. So it's just, people just watch it where it is, and you just got to be there. And you got to make sure you're monetizing it and not cannibalizing. I don't think you're cannibalizing viewers. You're finding them all and adding them up these days. But you have to make sure the money's there for the investment in the content.
Fabian?
Well, I think the proliferation of devices is a great opportunity, but it's also an enormous challenge. So we work with CNN. They have to bring their content to 300 different devices. That's an enormous challenge, not only from a design point of view, but also from a content strategy point of view. How do you actually create meaningful user journeys that go across that ecosystem? So I think what we see are 2 key challenges that you need to identify or resolve so you can be efficient about how you can serve that ecosystem from a design, from a user experience point of view. One is that content strategy to make sure you have connected user journeys. And the second one is to essentially have that kit of parts, that design language in place, so you can be really efficient about creating something that looks and feels and behaves the same way across a very, very fragmented device landscape.
Alan, what are you seeing?
So with just quickly about Rio. So the experience is watch and skip, and we see very different behaviors between TV and phone. We see about 8x time spent on TV. We see much longer watch times on TV. The behaviors between the two are very different, and it's because the touch screen is a very personal device. You have it in your hands. You want to interact with it. TV is much more ambient. People turn it on. They expect it to be able to tune out or do other things. And so that's what I think is interesting. The number of screens will continue to go up, but understanding how these devices are different is really, I think, where there's innovation to happen.
Jonathan, you came out of the mobile world, and now you're in which was sort of over-the-top programming in those days.
Before over the top.
Before over the
Right,
top.
right.
And now you're in pure long form over the top.
And now I think it's agnostic. I mean, we're all about spread your content as far and wide as you can do. It doesn't, it's reaching the audience. It doesn't matter what device they're viewing it through. Obviously, you want to monetize your content, so distributing through even Amazon channels. We launched in the US, UK, now it's Germany, Austria. It's a way to get your content out there without actually spending a great deal of money. So reach as a bigger audience as you can do.
And what are you finding with long form? Do you care about the device?
No, we don't. No, we don't, because we do short form and long form. We may cut content down for social, for marketing purposes, but otherwise, again, we're slightly agnostic. It can be short or long form. It depends on the content. It depends on how compelling it is. There isn't an answer to that. It's as good as the programming actually is.
I was talking at that point a little bit, I was talking to someone in our development team the other day, and it wasn't so much about making a 22-minute episode for TV and then digital shoulder programming. It was, what's that 22 minutes? And are there 2 to 3 minutes in that you can extract to make a viral hit out of that show? It wasn't adding on something for social. It's how can that longer form thing be cut up in the creative development process?
And also be a barker to watch the longer form.
Has the data been confirming your beliefs on how consumers react, or are they giving you some surprises? Ryan?
Yeah, I think similar to what Alan said, there's certain data that kind of proves your intuition is if somebody's watching on a gaming console or on a TV, the average view times are longer. But I think there are those surprises where you have content that's 20 minutes and on mobile people are watching 18 minutes. So I think most of it reinforces that, but there are those kind of surprises where you're like, oh, this actually is totally different than what we thought, and seeing the mobile devices. And I think what I was going to say about the devices for Gunpowder is, as everyone said, we're very much platform agnostic, and we built the company with that in mind. And it's also reinforced every day, where I think it's great we have someone here from like a UX perspective, because I know for me, everybody from the editor to the development team to the theatrical booker that we have, I want all of them to think like user experience designers. And if Facebook changes something about their platform, we do trainings on that and say, okay, Facebook's changed. People reading scripts, you need to kind of think about that change and how it affects our business. So I think more and more for our company and for everyone's approach to content, you kind of have to have that eye towards user experience and user interface, like throughout the organization.
Terry,
Before there's folks back there who are standing, if their seats up here want to come
Terry,
in, please feel free.
in the last report that just got published a couple of weeks ago, there's 1.5 billion smartphones, and the average consumption of video is 45 minutes a day. That business didn't exist 5 years ago. It wasn't even around, and it's only projected to grow exponentially from here forward. So if you think about all of the new opportunities that exist for content creators, and certainly on the distribution side around the world, we have almost every day a new channel that's being created that has a vast appetite for content creators.
There was so much discussion a few years ago on metrics, and that being the impediment to our businesses. You don't hear much about it anymore. Is that like an old issue that's been generally solved with all the data that we're getting on these new platforms, or is it still an issue on are we getting the right metrics in the right way to be able to do the right analyses? JR?
Tough question because everyone offers different metrics, right? So we look at their reach of the platform overall more than the metrics of that. So that plays into one thing. We, again, want to be able to monetize our content the right way on the platform. So we hope the metrics are there to support it. But we've seen platforms kind of come and go and ask for different things. And a little bit off your question, I find platforms asking for content that doesn't quite fit in there. Like we can all talk about Facebook Watch and how that is maybe working or not working. Pushing longer content on Facebook. If I watch something there, it feels like a long time, even though it's a few minutes. But to answer the question, metrics are important. The platforms have different reach, so you just expect different metrics from different ones.
Fabian?
Well, a few things come to my mind. I think metrics really matter, but I think a lot of people don't have a whole lot of time to worry about it too much, because I think there's a lot being figured out right now, and there's a lot of competition for the attention of the user to really consume their content. And I think metrics and data come second after that, unfortunately. I want to pick up maybe on that interesting statistic, the 45 minutes, because it's obviously quite relevant. It poses enormous opportunities. However, I think as the time of consuming content increases, the supply of content increases almost at a higher rate, which means that from an economic point of view, it poses enormous challenges how you actually can capture that opportunity. So from a user perspective, what we see a lot is, or from a user experience perspective, from a design perspective, what keeps us awake is actually creating meaningful user experiences where curation can take on a new meaning. Because as great as it is, you consume a little piece of 1 minute content here and another 50 seconds over there and then 20 minutes over there. From a business perspective, and from our case, from our client's perspective, where the real value lies is how you actually create a brand for yourself, which becomes a meaningful destination, and how you can create curate your content so you know what you stand for. And I think that's why Facebook and YouTube and whatever else are sort of really having such a dominating position, is because they don't have to worry about curation. They kind of stand for it's a one-shop-all destination. So the users there, they don't go anywhere else. So anyway, just wanted to comment on that.
Well, that's a good lead-in to talk about social media and its impact on the viewing habits of consumers. Bob, you want to talk about that?
Well, we were talking about it earlier. If you just look at the power of Facebook in today's world, I mean, from the context of politics to every bit of information that's being processed, I mean, 50% of America today gets their news from Facebook. Again, it didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago, but today it's a dominant force, not only on the economic side, which means that they're monetizing the content providers' content for the most part, but also everything else from an influence perspective. And I think the challenge for the industry, and I can tell you, we signed a global agreement with Warner Music, and we just launched it this month, 1st of October. And a big challenge for us is to make sure that the dependence that a lot of the industry has relied on early on to get awareness, meaning YouTube and Facebook, they have become the undisputed 800-pound gorilla. And that means that content creators and distributors have to be very aware of that. We see people like Warner using Facebook and YouTube for many years as branding extensions. And that is still an argument that many brands use, but at the risk of economics. And I can share with you some statistics which are industry-wide statistics that should alarm anyone. 40% of all of YouTube's traffic a year ago or so was music related. So of all the YouTube that you see in the world today, 40% of it was music related. Yet, and again, it's a little old statistics, they've changed it a little bit. A year ago, 4% of the industry was being paid as a result of that. So think about that disparity if you're an intellectual property owner. You have this intellectual property, you have used it and provided it to the likes of Facebook and YouTube. They're making 40% of the money and only paying out 4%. Again, don't hold me to the stats this particular year, but it's a widely held industry metrics that I think should tell anybody that's providing content to the world that, there's alarm bells out there, and the alarm bells are, you better have a strategy that goes beyond these two monsters in the industry.
Ryan, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I used to work at YouTube before joining Gunpowder and Sky, and so that stat's probably still accurate. It's probably more than that now. But
I was trying to be conservative.
yeah, and I mean, I think you're right, where partly why I chose to leave YouTube and was attracted to join Gunpowder and Sky is because they weren't expecting me and they weren't designing their business of, we're going to launch a bunch of YouTube channels and Facebook pages and that's our business, where Van Toffler and Floris Bauer, the founders, very much realize that they need to build a business and build the media company of the future, where YouTube and Facebook are a piece of what we do, but we also do traditional theatrical distribution. We are distributing other people's content. We do marketing. And so I think you're 100% right, where there was a lot of companies, and I saw it firsthand working at YouTube, that were like, okay, YouTube's the big thing. They're promising that monetization is going to happen and it's going to be great. And a lot of companies focused 100% on YouTube, and now they're trying to figure out how do they adapt their business. And I think no matter being focused on one platform, whether it's television, Facebook or YouTube, I think is a little bit dangerous. With anything, you kind of have to diversify your strategy. And so, yeah, 100% agree. They're kind of critical to any strategy, but they have to just be one component, especially when you're thinking about monetization and revenue.
I mean, there's a reason for that, obviously, because that's where all the users are, that's where the eyeballs are, so there's economies of scale and they can benefit from it enormously. So we work, I think pretty much every single client of ours, whether it's Red Bull or Vivo or whether it's broadcaster like NBC, they always face the same challenge: how to use strategically all these platforms and how to position their own ecosystem to become a meaningful destination. And it's quite complicated to get that right, because yes, YouTube and Facebook are great promotional platforms, and you have to be there. But at the same time, you don't want to sell out or you don't want to cannibalize your own business. So from our perspective, a sophisticated content strategy where you figure out what you're going to outsource, so to speak, and what you're going to keep in-house, and also how you're going to make sure you create that meaningful destination, so if somebody does come into your own ecosystem, there are good reasons to stay on there, and there's enough content there to consume, and you're not suddenly in a dead end and you quickly run back to platforms where you do have an enormous amount of choice. That's the great advantage of Facebook and YouTube on these platforms. There's just so much stuff there.
So, Jonathan, what's the challenge? How do you deal with the challenge of social media? As you've launched a dozen channels so far, you have about 30 you'll have by the end of the year.
Yeah.
What's the challenge with competing with and or using a Facebook and a YouTube?
Well, Facebook or not so much YouTube. We use that for promotional purposes, but not so much. But Facebook, it's now become 90% of our marketing strategy is on Facebook. So Facebook is enormously powerful, whereas a YouTube is not so much, because we want to build a quality content proposition on other platforms where we can monetize, and we use Facebook to drive to those platforms.
Alan?
So I think we're at a confluence of a few things here, and I think there's a change coming. I hope there's a change coming. So the three things that we've just talked about. One is, curation versus selection, where people have so much choice, leaves people not knowing what to play. The second thing is ad revenues, are pitiful from where they should be, and I think companies, brands are ready content creators are ready to stand up against that. And the third is this metric for attention and time spent is, it's really kind of degrading our experience. And I think we start to see, media outlets, consumers starting to stand up against this and say, you know what, I will pay for media, all right? I hope people will, because I think it is time for a change. I think nobody doubts at this point that Facebook has swung an election. And the kinds of media that it puts in front of us, full respect for what they've done in terms of building their company off of metrics, but we need something that drives quality at this point.
I agree.
Fabio?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, and we all have great hopes, especially because of the outcome of the elections, that things might change. But I'm not, but I'm not so sure whether. I guess it remains to be seen whether the innovation or the disruption is going to come from whether people are going to be willing to pay, which I think is going to be very hard sale. And I think if we see anything, I think most people who sort of experimented with developing sort of the SVOD model, seeing that there isn't really much appetite on the user side to really pay, even if it's very little. I think where there's some real opportunity is actually around new advertising models. I think that sort of ad model that YouTube and all these platforms have, I mean, it kind of works. It obviously generates revenues, but from a user experience perspective, quite awful. There must be something better out there. So that's what I'm personally holding my hopes out for.
What are we going to be talking about next year? Is it voice recognition? Is it voice curation? Is it Alexa, Siri? Where are they? Discoverability has always been a challenge.
Voice is really interesting, right? I don't think we're there yet. I think we can talk about it now, and then
Yeah.
we'll talk about it more next year, because it's a great playing field. You look at the Amazon Alexa skill app store. That's like the Apple iTunes app store in the very beginning, 10,000, 100,000 skills that anyone in this room can go make one, or big companies can go make their own. It's an interesting play. There's no monetization there yet. Talking about monetization, will people be comfortable with enabling an Amazon Alexa skill and then having an ad run? Or will they be upset if an ad, or if it pushes you to purchase something on Amazon, or if Google starts inserting ads into the Google Home? Like, that will be interesting to see what consumers will deal with in that space.
Someone described it the other day, I don't know where I read it, but Alexa being the third opinion in the room. And you think about it, and we have Alexas in multiple
I
rooms.
love
and
my Alexa,
Yeah, you can see that happening. Is it affecting your business models yet? Are you thinking about it as you're doing development?
So, yes, I think for me, the thing that's coming in the next year is about ambience, right? So we talk about voice, but I think the really interesting innovation product that's out there now from a media standpoint is the Echo Show. It's the first always-on screen that people have in their homes, and I think we're going to start seeing those from Apple and Facebook. Those TVs that we have installed in our house, they're black for 21 hours of the day. Those have an opportunity to be our channel for content, and we're hitting the limits of attention, right? Like, it's 11 hours of media a day. That's got to keep going up, but the only way that it's going to keep going up is if we start thinking about our environment as our media channel, rather than this little black thing that you have to interact with to get anything. So that's where I think it's going.
Fabian?
What?
Question?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great idea to have your big screen TV as art form, right? Versus the Yule log or the aquarium. But isn't your TV going to burn out like 10 times faster if you've always? I mean, I don't know what the lifespan of a.
Yeah, the 60-inch TVs now burn like 25 watts of power, which is less than what light bulbs did a few years ago. So, those things can handle long lifespans, and frankly, people are replacing those every 2.5 years now. So,
Well, I think concerning voice, I have a few interesting statistics. So Gartner predicted that 50% of all searches within 2 years will be done via voice. 20% of people are going to use a virtual personal assistant for daily tasks. And essentially, my third favorite statistic is essentially that customer experience is going to outweigh price and product experience as a key brand differentiator. So if you take those three things together and consider the challenges that you summarized so well about curation, discoverability, and I forgot what the third one was. Metrics. We can envision a future which is not that far away and quite real, that can, through voice and through essentially a conversational user interface, can address all those things quite nicely. Because some of the key challenges about the wealth of content, especially around the big screen, is around how do I find content, and how the user experience, although I'm guilty of that to some degree, or we are, is awful. I mean, trying to find something with a remote on a big screen, terrible. Trying to find something on a mobile phone with a touch screen, given if you have 50,000 pieces of content, also awful. But if you can just say a few words and you get a few meaningful answers back, problem solved. And I think that's when we're going to see a real paradigm shift in terms of who's going to be successful. But it also is an enormous challenge, I think, because it's going to be really, really easy for people to exit one content universe and enter another one. And it's going to be a challenge, I think, for YouTube too then.
Terry, we're producing today content for Amazon, so we get a chance to see everything that is happening on the Amazon platform after an e-commerce transaction has happened. So if you're buying a vitamin, you get your vitamin, and you may want to see a video pertaining to health and wellness. The merger or the acquisition of Whole Foods changes the paradigm completely, because when you start talking about voice activation and you want to find out something about the food group that you want to eat, whether it's nutrition or not, etc., and you have available to you a whole host of content on that food group, and you can order it at Whole Foods or at Amazon. It can be ready for pickup at Whole Foods, or it can be delivered to you within an hour, or you can prepare it yourself. These changes aren't a year away, they're literally months away. So when you start putting the ecosystem to work with voice and e-commerce, and then in this particular case, food, now you have totally upended what has historically been a different channel of consumption.
Well, with video screens now in virtually every retail business, restaurant, who doesn't think that supermarkets are going to be video-centric? Sure, very soon. You have to assume these are the reasons for these acquisitions, is to move them to move, frontline retail stores into digital ventures. And the concern I have with the voice recognition part of that, since a lot of the same companies are doing this, is that unlike Facebook, where you can go to a lot of different places and search for content, basically Alexa's choosing among who the winner is. Does that concern you? It concerns me as a consumer. Doesn't it concern you as a provider of content? On how when someone says, find me an interesting country music song, and Alexa chooses what to play.
Well, they're another massive player. I mean, when they purchased Whole Foods, right? Other food companies' stocks dropped. If they announce that you can make a phone call through your Amazon Alexa, mobile companies will suffer. They're another gigantic player that we have to figure out how to work with. So we have to figure out how to be there or be on a different platform if it's the right fit for you. But I think they're a massive, massive player. One thing about voice that I find interesting is the reason it will work is it gives me time back. I can walk around my kitchen and say, add strawberries to the shopping list, and then you can have them delivered to you. Right? Just grabbing a few seconds of extra time, not having to type something, is pretty much a big game changer with voice. Like, you just grab that time back.
I think it's going to be quite interesting how this is all going to play itself out. I think the scenario you just described and that you just described is obviously true for the Amazon ecosystem. But I think as a consumer or as a viewer, since we're in the world of video here, you don't necessarily live in the Amazon ecosystem the whole time. We started off talking about all the devices that are in your living room, and essentially how many we are part of so many different environments and contexts. And I think voice is there's not going to be like one voice solution that's going to be covering all of it. So my hope is that because there's several technologies and several platforms, there's going to be somewhat of an equalization and democratization happening about sort of what service you can access through voice.
Just remember, the latest version of Echo is with a video screen. Think about that.
Terry, just to address your concern, I believe that history repeats itself, and we did have that. That was payola, and it was regulated. And I can imagine that even with these massive companies, there's opportunity for regulation around that.
Questions? Yes, sir.
For Mr. Nugent, I have a fledgling web series. I want to find out Facebook's secret algorithms. A lot of creators want to know all that. What are the best resources to find out what's the best way to get reach on Facebook?
Sure. Yeah, that's a common question, something I think about every day. I mean, for me, there's certain fundamentals that I think, even though a lot of these platforms operate on algorithms, I mean, ultimately, all of the people designing those algorithms are trying to optimize for certain user behaviors. And I used to work with the product team pretty closely at YouTube, because all the product people at the company hate the fact that creators are trying to hack the algorithm, where they're like, just make good content and we'll deal with it. And I think creators think that that's smug, but ultimately I think there's certain fundamentals that are key, which I'll get to, and that reinforces kind of the algorithmic signals that you want. So on Facebook, for example, I think one of the most important things is just literally the split second or two that is like the first thing of your video, where on YouTube I would say the thumbnail, like I've done experiments on YouTube where changing the thumbnail will change the amount of views you get by 50%. So like little things like that, of having a great thumbnail, having the first second of the video be something that's going to stop people in their feed. And again, it goes back to user experiences. When we're editing content, I'll literally be thinking about, okay, if you're scrolling through stuff, is the first second of this video going to make you at least stop? And then, the next 5 seconds are going to convince you to watch for another minute. And so to me, that's a fundamental creative thing, is how do you get people to stop and interest them within a split second? It's an interesting creative challenge. And that reinforces the algorithm. Is, the Facebook algorithm has probably thousands and thousands of signals. One of them is probably like, do they hover? And then, the view time of the first couple of seconds, and then all the engagement that happens after the fact. But the first event to set off that trail of signals is literally what the first second of your video looks like. So like that, I think, is purely fundamental. I think on Facebook, the other big thing, which is also on YouTube, is like being timely and topical. So depending on the content you produce, if you're producing comedy that ties into the latest news story or what people are talking about, and from an operational standpoint, how do you build an organization that something happens and you have a video up about it in 5 minutes or 5 hours, whatever you can do. So that timeliness, again, isn't really built into the algorithm, but it's going to reinforce user behavior that the algorithm's optimizing for, is people want content that's relevant to the time that they're on Facebook, and that will kind of reinforce. And the last thing I would just say is like frequency and amount of content. So Facebook and YouTube are daily routines for these audiences, and the more your brand or channel has new stuff for them as they show up, it's just going to reinforce your content as part of their routine, which I think will be reinforced through the algorithm.
Let's talk about money for a minute. The monetization of linear channels and the traditional models, we all know what that is, on cable and broadcast, advertising, subscription, etc. That's pretty well entrenched. What has changed that has made over-the-top linear channels a viable alternative? Jonathan, obviously, let me start with you.
Maybe convenience. Convenience of where you can watch, so you're happy to pay. You're happy to pay for, if that answers the question. If you're looking for specific content that you really like, you're a car guy, and you want to see, whether it be Top Gear or whatever the TV show might be, but I want to watch it anywhere, I'm actually prepared to pay a premium to see that content, whether I be in a taxi or whether I be at home or at work or on the bus. And it doesn't matter what device I'm on, I'm paying one time to access it from multiple points. I think people are prepared to pay that, because we're seeing proof in the pudding. People are paying for these services, and an SVOD business is working, especially here in the States. And there is also the ability to use, back to mobile, the freemium business model of watching a certain amount of content for free with some relevant advertising and then upselling to a subscription business. People are doing that, and it's working extremely well.
JR?
It's interesting. I cut my cable bill.
Right.
Yeah, yay. A couple months ago, and
Because you got a lot of content you didn't want to see.
I don't bring it home with me. Yeah,
Right.
just keep it in the office. Then you talking about over-the-top platforms, a little, $4.99 here, $3.99 there, $7.99 there. It keeps adding up and
adds
adding
up.
up, and there's going to be a limit.
Yep.
Right. For example, we have this network that we launched a couple years ago, Buzzer Network. We have 40-something thousand hours of old game shows in our library. So we're running those on Buzzer Network. It's over the air, so you can get an old-fashioned antenna and get it on channel 13.1, I think, here in LA, which is doing really well for us because so many people are cutting that cable thing. It sounds perfect for an over-the-top standalone destination, but it's just not there yet. So we are finding more success in syndicating the content and fishing where the fish are. Full episodes on YouTube, full episodes on Facebook, monetizing there properly, working with Amazon Prime Video, getting that revenue, but making another destination where people have to come and pay $3.99 for it. It's not quite there. It may be there soon, but it seems like it should be, but it's not there. So I'm just a little worried about chipping away
depend on
people's
the content.
pocketbooks for
Right,
$8 a month,
right.
$4 a month.
Sure. I think these subscriptions they're not high subscriptions. They're like edible
Yeah.
chunks of money. But if you're talking about $2, $3, $4, $5, and there are other business models for other types of content. You might be in the hair industry, and we've done a study that people are prepared to pay $9 to $19.99 a month for this type of content. So again, it depends on the content.
Yeah.
And if the game show on Buzzer, you could win $1 million, maybe people would pay. It's almost like it's pay to play.
Yeah.
In order to participate with that game show, I'm willing to. It's like buying a lottery ticket in a way.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, that's a different platform.
One of the things that you've seen, Spotify is a perfect example.
You know that,
in-
Jonathan.
Right. Exactly.
Jonathan started in the call TV business in London, and so you see people who would spend
People will pay for strange things.
$100 a month
So
with a chance of winning
That's
something.
Right. That's right.
when you look at Spotify with their 60 million paid subscribers and supposedly going public in the next several months, this is a company that really came in and took Apple's business away from them because Apple was doing the download and they just missed that business. And now look at how they built their business. They built it on freemium. So people get comfortable, they got to listen to an ad, and then they watch or they hear their music, and now you get comfortable building your own playlist
smart.
and you add
That's
it, right?
smart. Smart
Brilliant,
business.
brilliant. So this is a perfect example of how these new models are emerging. And in the case of Spotify, because they're closely aligned with the music industry, the Wall Street Journal had an article last week that said they basically are the new salvation of the music industry. They've got a great opportunity to sample new artists and to bring out new artists, and also to give a wide distribution platform to the industry. And if their attempt, which has not worked, to launch video, and one can argue whether their video product will ever work. The point is that they have 60 million customers paying on average $10 a month. That's a huge business that came out of nowhere a couple of years ago.
Aren't you also finding, and I know Jonathan can speak to it as well, that there's just an enormous amount of good content out there that never gets a chance to be aired, that can be gathered up at a very low cost as a result, and so you can create these services at such a different cost than linear channels and the Discovery networks, that you can actually have low cost and low revenue and still have profitable businesses.
Is that a question for me?
Sure.
I think it depends. If the quality of the content is, what's the example of a big movie that's out right now that's made 20 years ago that people will still watch today, and it's kind of a cult classic, and maybe, that movie cost, I don't know, 10, 20, $50 million to make, but over the passage of time, you can make that money back. What I'm saying is you can repurpose older content. I'm not saying it's from the 1950s. I'm saying content that was really popular in multiple countries, whether it be in Australia or Brazil or the UK, the US. I think there's a way to repurpose content and reintroduce it to a market build an audience, and then build content for that specific audience. So it's a new kind of business model that we're playing with, which is tailoring channels to your passion and then making originals for that passion, but at the same time, you amortize your costs by monetizing old libraries, is the basic answer.
Well, I don't know. I think it will be quite complicated. I think there's a long tail and there's a short tail. I think in the short tail there will be monetization opportunities. I think on the long tail you're able, if your content is of that high quality and addresses that specific need, like the hairdressers. I'm curious to see what that content looks like.
Right.
But if
I'll show you.
Yes, can't wait. No, but there will be an audience, but it's obviously it's limited, and it's
for hairdressers. It's for
yeah,
people in
exactly. So
yeah.
there's a market, but it's limited. But I think in the world of, I think one of the things that won't change, is that has always been the case, is that people pay. There are two choices. There's advertising supported free content that people consume, and they have certain expectations on that, and namely it's free. And I don't think they're going to pay for convenience to have it accessible on other platforms, because I think over time that will not be an extra service that people are willing to pay for. They will just expect it. And then I think the question is who's going to, where and what is going to become the platform that's going to become a meaningful destination for long-form content. And I think Amazon is quite nicely positioning itself to become that platform where essentially long-form content that may not want to live on YouTube for a number of reasons could exist quite well, and through their Prime offering would be very accessible at a very low price point at scale to the end user. So I think the word of $2.99, $1.99, and $3.99 is going to be limited to great content for a very specific audience, but maybe not at scale by nature of what the content is.
No, I agree.
Alan, did you want to comment?
No.
Bob?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is if you think about this last phenomenon that we're witnessing with Netflix, right? A few years ago, Netflix announced that they were going to do a price increase, and the world revolted and they backed off. They just announced it last week, and nobody even made a comment about it. And there's only one reason why. They've got people hooked on their originals. It's not about all that junk that they were distributing 10 years ago to build that business. Now they frankly don't need Disney, or they don't need all of these others. They'd like to have them, but they have built a significant original content franchise. They're spending $6 billion a year to service that franchise. Highly unlikely that people that are on Netflix are going to discontinue it if they get another 10% price increase, which for 100 million customers a month, that's $100 million new dollars at just $1. So it's a big stakes game, but their business model shifted when they decided to go heavy into originals.
What I find interesting about the Netflix phenomena, because there are lots of other broadcasters and studios that could do the same because they have a catalog like that as well, but they're not able to do that because they're not, I guess, because they don't think about their brand that way. They haven't put their brand forward. They don't have the ecosystem of digital touchpoints for the consumer. So I find it always interesting that Netflix, because they essentially have such a simple offering and they have enough content right now, they're able to charge to begin with, which is great, and increase prices. And there's a lot of tolerance. If you look at a lot of studios and broadcasters, they kind of stand in their own way to do the same thing because they don't build their own brands. They have multiple touch points. They have channel brands, they have program brands that they put before they put their own brands, and that all complicates the whole offer quite tremendously.
So doesn't it get to the question of how important are aggregators? There was this phase of we don't need aggregators anymore. Everything we can sell our own. CBS can sell its content, and HBO can sell its content, and everyone can, although they're aggregators of their content, but we don't have to aggregate in the package of programming. What are we learning from that? I mean, I think part of what we're learning is really good content has a market no matter how you distribute it.
It lives on its own.
Right. It sort of stands on its own, but they're few and far between of those opportunities. The mass of programming out there faces the ordinary problems of discoverability and
Yeah.
metrics and how, how do you find your audience and
I don't
how do
think
they
you do.
find you?
I don't think
and-
you do need the aggregators anymore. If you want something specific, you can find it directly, and you can, as much as you can eat, and that doesn't have to be delivered through a CBS or any of these, whether it's a network. I think the networks are kind of going away, and the new networks are coming. It's the great unbundling is what we're seeing today.
I think the problem that creates is people don't know where to look. And so,
You find them on Facebook.
right, yeah. And Ben Thompson writes about this a lot. Is Stratechery is this cyclical aggregation and fragmentation, right? It's a cycle. Everything aggregates into one, and then eventually things start to fragment off, and then things fragment too much, and consumers can't take it, so they start to reaggregate. And we're going through a period right now where we're fragmenting.
Yep.
And at some point, that's going to go back the other way.
I would add that Amazon changes a lot of the games here because up until recently, and I don't know if they still do, they are the back end of Netflix. So all of the back end, the streaming, etc. All of our content is through the Amazon Web Services. So they offer an enormous sophistication to content creators all over the world with massive redundancy. So if we're distributing Warner Music's library in Latin America and you need to call that library up of those 15,000 titles, as good as all the suppliers are in Latin America, nobody's going to take the risk of giving it to a non-Amazon provider when you have the choice. But if you think about Amazon's ecosystem, besides that sophisticated AWS that can handle streaming and analytics and everything, they also have the e-commerce opportunity that they provide you. And then they've got all the content capability. So when you look at an aggregator that is ready to bust out, I would say that Amazon is probably going to be right up there because what they can create by way of the back end through AWS and the front end through their store and their e-commerce platform is pretty compelling to anyone who wants to have content and e-commerce made available on the Amazon platform.
They're totally vertical.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
As somebody who works with brands trying to navigate this Byzantine world, could any of you speak to what major brands that are trying to figure out how to spend major dollars, what strategies they're taking to understand this? I'm literally working with clients that are like lost in the wilderness, but they have money to spend and they're trying to figure it out because the model's changing day by day.
Who wants to take that? You want to start,
For
Jerry?
our content, we're a production company, so we work with a lot of brands and sponsors to be integrated into the actual show, right? We'll all skip commercials, we don't see them anymore, so you need to be in the show. What's an integrated marketing play, integrated sponsorship? It's been done for years on shows, but to keep coming back to that, more so now, what's the distribution plan, right? Because there's something that's all fragmented, people, where do they find it? So it's great to be integrated into the show, that's wonderful, or to do a digital original tied to a larger show, but where are you going to distribute that beyond your Facebook and your Twitter and your Instagram? Are you going to partner with an entertainment publication like EW, or are you going to partner with something like Oath for massive distribution? What's that distribution play? So we're hearing that more and more, like integrated content, like when brand in the show, or a show made around the content, and then what's that distribution play beyond your ecosystem of tens of millions of people you can reach?
Ryan?
Yeah, that question was making me think of the original question of metrics, and I think for brands and for anybody really producing content and figuring out where to spend money I think the biggest thing is to know what metrics matter and what the value of certain metrics are. So I think everybody's always distracted of, by view counts of like, oh, this has 10 million views and this has 100,000 views on YouTube. Where I think what brands and part of our narrative when we work with brands or talk about our marketing strategy is, while those are kind of interesting metrics, what we usually focus on, the engagement, the view-through rate, and I think that's like a big thing for brands where they kind of know, all right, cost per view across these platforms, and they kind of compare that, but and sometimes it's hard to quantify certain things of like, well, how do you quantify a community where you could do a sponsorship of some influencer and they may not have 5 million subscribers, but they have 500,000, but their sense of community is going to be much more valuable. And so I think a big thing is an education for brands and anybody working in the space of how do you actually, what metrics actually matter for certain objectives, and then how do you value the same view, and one views 5 minutes and another views 30 seconds. I don't think enough people ask those questions and don't have like the literacy to actually know where to look. And so I think that's going to be a big thing that separates people.
Well, I think it, for me, it begs the question, what kind of brand? Because the spectrum is quite big, from branded content to a channel brand to a broadcaster brand. And I think depending where you want to position yourself, it's a different strategy you want to adopt. So, you know, if I look at branded content, which I personally find quite interesting and challenging, obviously enormously powerful, but I always wonder, like, okay, well, how do you build brand equity? How do you create something that sort of goes beyond that one piece of content that you may put on the map? Similarly, I think the same for channel brand or destination brands. I always find it interesting when I look at some broadcasters and they create all these new brands like Caesar or Hey You in the UK, and they fragment further their own propositioning, and that to me is a way not to build equity. When you go back to look at Netflix, everything they do, they put Netflix front and center. So they keep building equity, brand equity, with everything, every dollar they spend in their marketing budget. If you look a lot what traditional broadcasters do in marketing, they spend a lot of money, but they're not really building equity. I think they're sort of promoting a show, they're promoting a program, but the next program comes around and they have to start almost over again. So I think that's, for me, a very interesting observation with regards to brands.
And I also think that brands, by and large, haven't adapted to the new world and the real world of doing business. You know, if you're still pulling out a 30-second commercial, I mean, it's really antiquated. If you look at the consumption on short form anyways, in the digital video, it's, you know, the 15 seconds. It's really more native to the content that you're creating or that the viewer is watching. But there are a lot of great examples of brands that came out of this world we're in. Harry's, the razor company. I think they were sold recently for $1 billion. I mean, this was really a YouTube phenomenon. They launched the product. They became buzzworthy. They ended up challenging this old guard, Gillette razors. The Shave Club, and it became what is happening today. So the opportunity of
P&G bought them, didn't they?
right, Unilever bought them, right? So the whole concept here is you've got to think 360, and it's not just about the old ways of doing business. It's the new ways, new channels, new opportunities. How do I embrace Amazon, not fight them? How do I create product that is relevant for the times, including the content that I want? And I think recently Havas, one of the big conglomerates in Europe, did a research. The most recognized brands in the world today, whether that's Google, Facebook, or Apple, had one thing in common: content. It's all about content and the creation and the distribution of it.
Questions? So we talked about brands and the big, big entities, but what about something that Alan brought up, dwindling advertisement? What's being addressed, from your end, or what do you see in terms of, luring in advertisers that have a tough time navigating the quagmire and figuring out, how do they reach people for the return on the dollars that they're spending?
I think the article today in the Wall Street Journal about Procter & Gamble, we were talking about this earlier, and Nelson Peltz, who came in and said, hey, change the way you're doing business. You're a big, giant business that is as American as apple pie, but you haven't adapted to the new world of social media, which I thought was funny because Nelson Peltz, with all due respect, is 80 plus years old, but he's out there talking social media to Procter & Gamble. And as a result of that, this proxy fight, which today said cost $60 million to fight whether he was going to be on the board, his big defining moment was, if P&G doesn't change the way they're doing business to address the needs of today's consumer, specifically related to content, social media, etc., you're going to go the way of the dinosaur. And that's a big statement coming from what we all, at least I grew up as seeing and admiring as one of the great American packaged good companies, Procter & Gamble. So everything is today up for grabs.
I'd say 4 years ago, somebody would do an on-air buy, a sponsor would do an on-air buy integration to a show, have to buy media around that with the broadcaster, and all the digital and social was added value, just in there, don't care about. Now it's changed over the years. You give us your digital ideas. What are the digital social ideas? Now it has to have a digital social play, and even we can't afford the on-air piece. We don't want to buy the media around it as well. We don't want the media commitment. So let's just do a digital social thing. By the way, why don't you just make a separate show for us, and we'll do something like that. So it's definitely changing. I think people are. Commercials, 30-second spots just seem so kind of antiquated and old. But you do need that broad reach for some brands. They just need that broad recognition. But more and more, it's going toward digital social, and then what can you create in the digital social space for us from that used to be a TV 30-second spot.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
What about like Snapchat and Instagram? Where does that fall in this whole entire movie?
Alan?
Sure. What can I say there? I have a lot of respect for Snapchat. They've been innovating the whole time, and they've been doing some great stuff. That said, I think both what Instagram and Snapchat are doing right now demonstrates that people will be consuming media much more quickly than they have in the past, right? I mean, stories is this tap, 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 tap experience, and you do linger on some things, but that has it has positive effects and it has negative effects. Positive effects are that people do want to navigate media much more quickly, and they can. Negative effects is who knows what it's going to do for people's attention. It also has a side effect of what Ryan was talking about earlier, is that I think we're going to see this optimization for everybody just trying to hit you in the first second, and it's very hard. I'm sure some people are amazing at it. Very hard to deliver a valuable message in a split second, right? So, I think it's inevitable. It's just going to keep happening.
Ryan?
I don't know if this answers your question, but the thing I thought was most interesting about Snapchat is I forget who did this analysis, but they looked at when Snapchat launched the Discover channels and the diversity of content and formats, and then they mapped it over time where basically the conclusion was if you look at the Discover channels now, they're all basically the same format and they all talk about the same exact content, and the argument was it's really telling of who the audience is, and it didn't take media partners long after a couple months of being on the platform to realize what worked, and so there's just like a homogenous, there's different brand names, but they're all kind of doing the same celebrity news and gossip. And so I think for Snapchat, at least for the way we think about it, is there's a very specific audience that uses Snapchat, where I think Instagram is a little bit broader. Instagram has a little bit is more mature on kind of the marketing standpoint, so Snapchat is a little bit higher bar of entry of, if you want to use that as a platform for marketing, it's a little bit harder. But I think we are constantly looking at all the platforms of who are the audience for a particular project, and do we think that they're more on Snapchat, and we do the research of, comparing against Instagram. So I think they're all critical, but I think it's most interesting is there's certain formats and expectations for content on Snapchat, and same to Instagram, but I think Snapchat is the most kind of narrow of what people are interested in when they're kind of pulling up that app.
Questions?
I can add to that Instagram thing. We talk to networks and build social ecosystems around shows all the time when we're launching something. It's like Twitter's the fire hose of information, right? People playing your game, talking about your TV show right away. But it's like a political mess. People are trolls, people are being mean there. Facebook, you don't have the reach, you got to pay to kind of get that reach if you're marketing something. So Instagram seems to be kind of right in the middle, kind of cool, kind of you think your nieces and nephews use it, and people in the room can kind of get it. So they like Instagram there. Instagram stories are great because now you can swipe up off that platform somewhere else and watch a YouTube video and monetize that very easily. I think that was a big game changer. And Snapchat, I think brands have a hard time figuring it out because they don't know what to do there. And I like that it's a very closed, curated ecosystem. It feels like there's less like fake news and nonsense there because it's so curated. So it's a good person-to-person communication thing, and you can get the news that you care about. Like you said, it's changed over time to hit that audience just right. But I think brands really have a hard time figuring out Snapchat for sure.
So everyone sort of figured out long form and monetization of long form. We now have a lot of more opportunities with short form video. And I'm curious what has changed that's made short form more viable from an economic standpoint, and what do you make of the announcement by the former owner of DreamWorks starting a fund for, what was it, $1 billion? $2 billion to create a short form video that no one thought could make money before. Now, how does that change the marketplace?
Well, his premise is all based on time compression, right? That you're going from a world where you had 3 channels to unlimited channels, and that time today added to mobility gives you an opportunity to capture somebody's attention and be able to deliver a scripted product. So what he's looking to do is deliver scripted product. I mean, Game of Thrones in 10 minutes. That's a very tall order if you can do that. But I do believe, and that's what our business is all about, I do believe that the world of short form has immense, immense opportunities, because mobility and short form are pretty much hand in hand. I mean, Facebook drove it, but a lot of other people are perfecting it. If you deliver content to people that they can munch on and consume and entertain them, then you will win the battle, because the distribution is there. All of these opportunities around the world are there. I mean, we're just talking United States, but around the world, this thing is growing maybe even faster than it is growing here. So we're big believers that short form will continue to grow, and the challenge for the content creators is to probably compress more time in the content that they're producing, because we simply don't have the time that we may have had even 3 or 5 years ago.
Alan?
Echoing that, I'm very, very bullish on short form. On Rio, we're completely focused on that. I watch a lot of Big Think does these 2-minute talks about interesting subjects, and each one of them is super cool. Vox is doing some great explainer videos that last 3 to 4 minutes. And I'm also a big believer that will turn into episodic. And so there's Katzenberg doing $2 billion, but effectively, Facebook's investment in content, I think, is primarily going to be around short form episodic. And so, this is the time.
Fabian?
Yeah, I mean, wholeheartedly agree. There's just because there's going to be more opportunity to watch videos, short form video with the device proliferation that we talked about, there clearly is a great market. I think the great challenge is obviously if you are the creator of short form content, if you create a platform, what does curation mean for short form content? What does a brand? What does a channel mean? What is a brand? I mean, we live in a world where the entire ecosystem is still very much optimized around long form content, long form or medium, whatever I want to call it. So I think with short form content on the rise, I think the business models, the user experience, or the productization, all those elements are still not there, and it's going to be quite interesting to see where that is going to fall into place.
How do you deal with this?
I agree with what you're saying about management and this chaos out there right now. It's hard to manage something and say, this is what's going on, and measure it properly. You're going to be able to measure it to manage it. Right now, it's kind of Wild West right now. So in short form, I believe short form's the right way to go. I think it's going there. But there's a big move in the AI space to adapt the formulas to calculate short form creation, to basically have machines create short form. Because all you're doing is running algorithms and math. I mean, simple matrix. I mean, romantic comedy, fill in the blank. There's a formula to this. Do you feel any threat or concern about that space?
I don't. I mean, we've tried it. We've worked at looking at automation to help us create a lot of short form. I think the user wants authenticity, and I think once you try to create something that doesn't have the authenticity by maybe going the cheap route of looking at algorithms create content via some computers, I think that the content creator at the end of the day is a creative individual. And you have to have that as your initial source. Once you start playing that, the machines can replace that, I think it's a dangerous slope, but more importantly, I think the consumer or the viewer today is not going to be fooled by that. They want content of a quality nature, and so the times that we've tried it, it hasn't worked, and we've decided against continuing.
Yes.
How does short form get seen to be distributed? So in other words, if you're making a product Do you put it on the YouTube to have it be seen by the most eyeballs with the potential of it being picked up for distribution? Or do you put it on your website and then put teasers out on YouTube or Facebook? How does that dynamic work?
You want to?
Well, I mean, I could. I'm not sure on the, like, as a content creator, but I will say that I do believe, from a distribution standpoint, tastemakers and getting with, working with influencers, and not strictly YouTube influencers, but people who are the tastemakers of content is, I believe there's going to be a rise in that. So, my 2 cents is find folks that will resonate with that and get them to help you promote it. But that's not a practical answer, and I'd be curious to hear from Ryan, actually.
Right.
I mean, I would put it up where people are going to find it. I mean, if you put it on your website, the amount of effort you need to do to get people to find it is going to be so hard. So I think if it's like a web series, and a little bit depends on the content, I think put it up. You can, and we've done this a little bit of where we put stuff up and we kind of use it as like a mini focus group. And if we have little bits of content that we put up, when we go into pitch it as a full series, we'll use that and say, we've kind of tested this character out. We didn't get a ton of views, but we have, the engagement's pretty crazy on it. And so we'll use that information to kind of iterate on the actual content before we take it out. But yeah, I think if you believe in it, you need to put it somewhere that people are going to see it. So whether it's just find an existing audience, I think YouTube and Facebook have that, and it's the most accessible. Or if you have somebody that you're working with that can point 10,000 people to something, then your options are a little bit more open.
Question.
He kind of answered a little bit. My main question was, if you have footage and the quality of the footage isn't spot on, it's not A-list kind of footage. If the content's there and the idea is there and there's potential in the idea, do you then kind of take it under your wing and then maybe have it reshot under a different format kind of thing?
Bob?
Well, first of all, again, the premise is you can't fool the viewer anymore. So if you're going to be fully committed to content, then you got to be fully committed to content. And if you want to get an audience, you just got to determine what audience it is that you want to get. So in our case, we are paid views, 100 million views a month. And this is non-Facebook, non-YouTube. These are the publishers that we work with in delivering our content. Our goal is to increase that by a factor of 5 between now and the end of 2018. So our goal is to have 500 million video views a month that we're getting paid for, right? It may be fractions of a penny in some instances, but we're getting paid for it. That's the business, but we produce 1,500 original pieces a month to get there. And we try a lot of things. So if we aren't seeing so we came out with a Bruno Mars video not long ago. It went through the roof because Bruno Mars is one of the hottest artists in the world. Well, we came up with other products that didn't work. So we want to do a lot more Bruno Mars and a lot of less things that don't work. So I think part of this is, where do you see the appetite for the content that you're getting? But one thing is for certain. If you're in the content business in the short form, you better come in with scale and with quality. Because if you don't, you're just not going to make it. And it doesn't matter. You could have the best product or the 1-minute video that the world wants to see. But if you don't have thousands of those behind you, then you're really a flash in the pan, right? You're just basically doing a one-off. But if you're going to be in the business of content, you got to get in the business of content, both creating and distributing it.
Fabian?
No, I agree. I think in general, because there's so much choice and it grows exponentially by the day. If there's no quality there and if it doesn't feel authentic, people are just not going to touch it.
You're asking about the quality of something you've shot, and you should go reshoot it, right?
It's like, I've done multiple projects where I use Red Cam and then I use just a 5D, 7D, or I experiment a lot.
Yep.
And then some of the stuff is really good, but some of the acting wasn't that good, or some of the things were out of whack.
Yeah.
And there's the camera shots that are not that good, but the performances are amazing, and the blocking is good, and the energy's there. And I want to put multiple pieces on my channels, and I want to also have more outlets, because I find myself pigeonholed strictly using YouTube or strictly using Facebook, and I just feel like there's not enough vast acidity. I don't feel there's enough options, and I haven't really brainstormed it just yet, but.
Regarding the quality of the content that you have, I don't know about reshooting it. I mean, my 10-year-old watches crappy videos on YouTube all day, like stuff that's shot horribly. So it might not look great, but if the content's there and the performance is there and will resonate with somebody, there's value in it out there, I think.
Okay.
As far as distribution goes, you know, these gigantic platforms we're talking about, you know, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, look at some of these smaller social platforms. There's a lot of live streaming platforms that might be a way. People are a little more forgiving on that platform. If you want to look at something like YouNow or something, or maybe the content you're making is right for Musical.ly. You're not going to make any money off of it, but you might build an audience, or you might make some money off of it. So look at other smaller social platforms to see if your content will resonate with people there. Like I knew a lot of people who were at YouTube and jumped over to Vine because they could make an audience on Vine much quicker than they could on YouTube. So maybe look at other platforms that maybe have an audience that will connect with your stuff, and maybe you can grow faster there.
Right? Or just kind of get a smaller budget or a larger budget and then reshoot, you know, higher quality product.
You could, but again, I think if there's quality in the performance and it doesn't look that great, I think there's something that people will grab onto to there. It's my opinion.
Question.
Ryan, you said that you changed thumbnails and really concentrate on the first second and the first 5. Do you have anything anywhere you recommend we look at? I'm just a girl with a business who wants to do a video and I'm meeting someone and I'm trying to go in running the right direction. How can I learn how to pick the right thumbnail and the right first 5?
I mean, I think this concept is not new. Like I've used the analogy of the amount of time that goes into like designing a magazine cover. Like the publishers have been doing this forever, of who's on our cover, what colors is it for the fall, like, and so that's just carried over into little thumbnail designs. I mean, I think the best thing to do is go to YouTube on your phone or on a desktop and just figure out where is your eye drawn on the page, because that's going to be, and you'll just learn as a user, if you open up the home page, your eye will automatically be drawn somewhere, and ask yourself, like, why was my eye drawn here? Oh, because this is like a bright, it pops off the page because it's bright, or some other element. But I mean, the best practices are really straightforward. It's how do you design something so that it pops and stands out when you're looking at 10 different thumbnails, and is it legible when you shrink it down to a certain size? Because I think people design things on their big computer, but on YouTube or Facebook, these things show up, you know, as a square inch or something. So, yeah, I would just kind of act as the user and see what other people are doing that draws your eye in, and it's, you know, color, close shots, you know, things like that.
Anyone you like in particular?
I mean, you know, BuzzFeed, any of the top YouTube channels they all have their slightly different style, but it's pretty standard practice, and the people that get it, you know, are kind of on the homepage of YouTube every day.
With that, we're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank the panelists, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions you may have after.